We're going live. Hey, good evening, everybody. Dr. Nathan Thompson here with Exemplify Health Center, an affiliate of the Wellness Way. Happy Monday evening, guys. Hope you guys had a great weekend. If you are watching right now, make sure that you say hello. And also let me know where you guys are watching from. I always love to see people watch from all over the world. I know that right now we are streaming on Facebook at Dr. Nathan Thompson. We're streaming live on Exemplify Health Center on Facebook, also streaming live at Dr. Nathan Thompson on YouTube, and also streaming live on my phone on Instagram. So we have some wonderful people on Instagram that are watching right now from all over. So we have people from Indonesia right now. We have people from Canada. That is just really, really awesome. Thank you guys, all, as always, from the bottom of my heart for watching. So I always appreciate it. And I always really, really am interested in seeing where people are from. So I'm kind of a geography buff a little bit. So guys, today we're going to talk about fasting. And I'm going to go over this with you in two parts. Just for time's sake, I'm going to go over a fasting part one and then a fasting part two. Mainly today, what we're going to cover is we're going to cover the types of fasting, but also I'm going to show you lab work that will show you who should and who shouldn't, and help you to understand why a person should fast or why a person shouldn't fast. So there are some rules that are involved. And a lot of it has to do with hormones, but I'll explain that a little bit deeper in just a second. So if you guys are joining us live, again, make sure you say hello. Let me know also where you are watching from. And just as a FYI, coming up tomorrow evening is our famous inflammation talk. That is an in-person event right here at Exemplify Health Center. So Tuesday, March 14th at 6 o'clock p.m. Guys, interestingly enough, inflammation is the first thing that you have to handle, that you have to tackle. Everybody has heard it before, but very, very few people actually understand. And in fact, I've even heard medical doctors who absolutely butchered this whole idea of inflammation. And guys, one of the things that you're going to notice is that most of medicine is actually treating either the effects of inflammation or trying to lower inflammation with medications, whether that is NSAIDs or pain medication, or whether that's corticosteroids. I mean, you look at all autoimmunity today, they're trying to downregulate an immune response rather than actually trying to figure out why the immune response is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. So yes, we do talk about inflammation. Acute inflammation is good. Chronic inflammation, you better figure out what is causing the immune system to respond in that way. No, it's not making a mistake. No, it's not messing up. What it's doing instead is it's doing exactly what it's supposed to do, which means that there are some things that you're doing that's creating an inflammatory trigger. And just a hint. Guys, where does most of your immune system sit? It sits at the barriers, which means if you have very poor barrier function, then you are going to be chronically inflamed. So you got to figure out how to improve barrier function, especially. So this is an in-person event. You guys can go to the top of the page. If you're watching on Facebook, on either one, you can go to the top of the page and you can follow the Eventbrite link and get registered for it. We do have a couple of spots available for tomorrow night at 6 o'clock sharp, in-person event. And then if you are watching on Instagram, you can go ahead and follow our Linktree account, the one profile or one web address that they allow you on Instagram, and you will see how to register if you follow the Linktree link, and you can register for that inflammation talk. And this is for people who are in the Chicagoland area especially. So don't miss out. Our next one will be approximately in about 3 weeks. And guys, when we do this, it is unbelievable. We talk about inflammation, and it helps people to understand where they need to start as far as reclaiming their life and reclaiming their health. So let's get into fasting, guys. What on earth is fasting? I'm going to give you the definition. Fasting is the rejuvenation of the body through the intentional abstinence of food or eating. So fasting has gained a lot of traction over the last, decade or so. And really all it talks about is what our ancestors did all the time. They didn't eat all the time, mainly because food wasn't always available. So fasting was just actually a part of their everyday life. But if you look at today, we can eat pretty much whenever we want, and that has created a lot of problems. So when you talk about fasting, it is intentional. Sometimes I actually fast and I don't realize it because like today, I really haven't eaten all day, and I'll eat tonight. I pretty much practice intermittent fasting. Sometimes not even by intention. It's just, I just forget to eat. So I'll eat one meal, and I'll go over with you the difference between intermittent fasting and 3-day fasting, 5-day fasting, and things like that. But It's the intentional abstinence of food. A lot of times when we ask people, hey, um, hey, could you do a 3-day fast? Most people said there's no way on God's green earth that I could. And I think that for a lot of people, they should have the ability to be able to do a 3-day fast if they were so called to do. I know that last year I did a 3-day fast for 5 weeks straight. So every week I did a 3-day fast. And I didn't necessarily need to, but it was just mostly of just me saying, when people would say, oh, it's too hard to do, just so that I could tell them, yeah, but I have done it now for the 5th time in 5 weeks. So if I can do it, you can do it. I don't hold any kind of magical willpower or any kind of magical powers other than just me deciding that I am going to do it. So when you look at fasting, let's talk about the different types of fasting, because you're going to go and you're going to read all kinds of stuff. And sometimes I actually think that they make fasting more complicated than what it needs to be. The intentional withholding of food, okay, for an X amount of time. So here you have these different kind of fasting models. You have intermittent fasting, or time restricted eating. I would actually say would be a better description of it, because guys, if you look at intermittent fasting, you're really not fasting. Because if you look at the transit time of most digestive systems, they might be running anywhere from 18 to 36 hours, which means technically, even if you fasted for 24 hours, you still are extracting nutrients and it's still going through the gastrointestinal system. And so you still have food in the gastrointestinal system. So at that point, I guess you could debate it or not. Is that truly fasting if you still have some level of food within the GI system? So you have intermittent fasting, or also known as time restricted eating. You also have what you would know as 5-2 fasting, in which you're going to eat 4 or 5 days, fast for 2. You got a 3-day fast. You also have a 5-day fast. And guys, it can go really, into extended fast even beyond that. I know the longest that I ever fasted was for 6 days. Why 6 days? Well, because the longest I fasted was 5 days. And so I just wanted to say that I did a day extra. There wasn't much difference between day 5 and day 6. And was it painful? A little bit. But I was pretty resolute in finishing it. So I made it the whole entire 6 days. And I know some people who have gone 15 days, 20 days, 21 days as well. Now, what's interesting about this, when we talk about this, is, the whole idea of fasting. If you look at the other end, other spectrum, I would say here in the United States, we eat just way too much. This is an interesting article from the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. This is not a new article. This actually goes back to 1973, so 50 years ago, if you can imagine that. And here's what's interesting, because if you take the opposite of this, the opposite of what this article describes can also be true. So what they did is they actually fed people 100 grams of carbohydrates. And what they were coming from was from glucose, from fructose, from sucrose, from honey, orange juice. And basically, these were some very simple, quickly digestible carbohydrates. And one of the things that they found is at even within in 100 grams of these simple carbohydrates, one of the things that they found is that it diminished the activity of a certain white blood cell. This is known as neutrophils, and it diminished that activity of them for a long period of time. Okay. And we're talking about hours after this happening. So you can go ahead and you can read this article. But what was interesting is high doses of sugar decrease the activity of neutrophils. Guys, what are neutrophils? Neutrophils are a certain type of bacteria whose really sole function is to handle bacterial infections. This is why, guys, when people say, hey, sugar diminishes the immune system, they're 100% right. And think about it. A lot of people who may be eating sugar at this level 3, 4, 5 times a day of eating in these 100-gram increments, that they're basically diminishing the activity of these cells that help you overcome a bacterial infection. So this is why, when people say, oh, it's the flu season, or, it's ear infection season, I'm like, no, it's not. Come on, guys. What it is high sugar season, especially, when you start to get around Thanksgiving and Christmas and New Year's and birthdays and things like that. So you diminish the body's ability to be able to fight off infection when you're consuming large amounts of sugar. And this is also true when people say that they catch things. Oh, I caught this bacteria. So-and-so gave it to me. Or I caught strep. Well, if that were 100% true, then everybody who is exposed to it would have an infection. And it goes back to the question of saying, why is it that two people expose the same bacteria, same virus, one person gets very sick, the other one has the sniffles for 1 or 2 days? It's the same doggone bacteria, it's the same doggone virus. And maybe this whole idea that catching things is not 100% accurate, 100% true. Maybe it has to do with the strength of the host. So when you look at this study says that it basically paralyzed the neutrophils when you're having a dose of sugar, simple sugar, and it's 100 grams, so 400 calories of the simple sugar. And it did that for 5 hours, which means what if you were doing that for 3 meals a day and you are diminishing the activity of these white blood cells for the whole entire day? So I thought that was interesting, and it didn't decrease the number of neutrophils as much as it decreased the activity. And remember this, glucose and vitamin C compete on their receptor sites of neutrophils, which means that glucose will have a higher affinity for vitamin C, which means that cell takes in glucose. It's not going to take in vitamin C, which will significantly shorten the lifespan and cause an increase of oxidative stress on that cell, which will kill it off a lot quicker. So let's talk about the different types of fasting during part one. Here's the first thing that I want to talk about is intermittent fasting. Intermittent fasting, or we'll also call it time-restricted eating. Now, I want to make a pretty bold statement because literally there's people who have their whole accounts are all about fasting. And guys, I've done intermittent fasting. That's generally how I eat. But I'm going to tell you something that there really is nothing magical about it. Okay. So there's nothing magical about time restricted eating or intermittent fasting. Here is what it affords you. Number one, it's going to decrease your cell's exposure to insulin. That's necessarily not a bad thing. So if it's not, the reason why is this, guys, is your cells have receptors for insulin. Muscle cells, liver cells, they all have receptors for insulin. It's the lock and key that allows sugar to be able to go into the cell. And guys, when you are exposing your cells to high amounts of insulin, you are going to cause downregulation of those receptors. Okay. It's no different than if you are smoking. You smoke a lot, you're going to have those receptors are going to be a whole heck of a lot less sensitive to nicotine, which means you need more of it in order to achieve the same effect. So you decrease your insulin exposure. So you're just not going to be secreting as much insulin because you're just going to decrease how much food that you're eating throughout the day. And let's be honest, a lot of people eat a lot of sugar. The other thing too, by shrinking down your amount of food that you can eat within a certain time period, is also going to naturally decrease your calorie intake. So how much energy you're putting into your system. And I want you to think about it. If we said, hey, and that's why I will use it in people, is say, hey, stop the mindless grazing. Put a couple of rules on you. And what I want you to do is I only want to give yourself the freedom to be able to eat within 6 hours. So as soon as you start eating, you have 6 hours to eat everything that you're going to eat for the whole entire day. But the other 18 hours, you have to be completely not eating or quote unquote fasting. And so it just basically puts a rule on people, and it forces them not to be eating every time that they have some kind of inkling to have some kind of food, snack, or sugar, because there are testing that you can do looking at their leptin levels. And if those leptin levels are high, we know that they're leptin resistant. And so we know that their hunger mechanism is completely messed up. And you know that they're just mindlessly eating for the whole entire day. So for them, some people, they need that rule. They need that mental cue to say, you cannot eat, outside of this 8-hour, for some people, 6-hour, 4-hour window to be able to eat. And with intermittent fasting, the best way to start is go 16-8, then shrink it down to 18-6, and then shrink it down to 24. So when is the best time to eat and when is the best time to fast? Well, I will tell you this. In my opinion, if you're talking about adherence, the best way to adhere to it would be to really skip breakfast and then, break your fast, lunch and then going into dinner. But actually, if you want to be a little bit more in sync with your hormones and with your cortisol rhythm, actually the best time to do it and would probably do a little bit better as far as weight loss would be to break your fast in the morning and have your last meal at lunch. The only problem is it's really tough for people who they want to eat at night. And so a lot of their family things and things like that are geared around towards the night. So I get it. I understand it. Do I like intermittent fasting? The answer is yes, that I do in fact like intermittent fasting. But again, there's nothing that's magical about it. So when you look at this, they'll make it super scientific and kind of complicated. But what is 16:8? What is 18:6, 24? What does that mean? 16 means the time that you are fasting. 8 hours means the window that you can actually feed. Same thing for 18:6. Same thing for 20 hours of fasting and 4 hours of feeding. So basically, I've used this with a lot of people of 18 hours of fasting and 6 hours of eating. And I've used it a lot of men when we have worked at, doing some large group kind of things, some fun things with our Man Up Challenge. And we have said, hey, let's work on intermittent fasting and just shrinking the window that we are eating. And I only want you to eat these certain types of foods during that time. And men absolutely love it. And so it's just, again, they start feeding if they're doing 18:6, they have lunch at 12, and then they should be finishing up their dinner by 6 o'clock. So it's kind of an easy thing to do, but they'll notice that when they do that and they skip breakfast, they end up eating less throughout their day. Now, when you look at an extended fast, so we're talking about, going beyond one day. And yes, you can do a 48-hour fast. I actually did that last week. So I skipped one day of eating and I ate on Sunday and then ate again on Tuesday. And not really a big deal, guys. The longer that you do it, the easier it actually becomes. But if you look at a 3-day fast or a 5-day fast, what does that actually mean? Well, that means for 3 days, it could be 4 days, it can be 5 days, is basically no food. You can have water. We allow for coffee. We allow for tea. And then also, depending on how long that you are fasting from, usually this doesn't have to happen if you're doing it for 3 days, but to try to keep your minerals up like potassium, sodium, and magnesium. I'm going to do probably some content coming up about the whole idea between, restricting salt. You don't need to restrict salt as much as you need more potassium. So guys, when you look at your daily requirements of potassium, depending on what you read, 3,500 up to 4,700 milligrams of potassium every single day. And the same thing with sodium. You're looking at, 4 to 5 grams of sodium, and magnesium, I believe, is around 750 milligrams per day. Most people are very inadequate when it comes to consuming that much potassium and magnesium every single day. And it's not about restricting your salt, it's making sure that you're getting enough potassium. This is also very hard to measure because most of your potassium and your salt is within your cells. It's intracellular. So when they do a blood test looking at potassium levels, they're literally measuring 3% of your total potassium. And your whole nerve system, guys, runs on potassium and sodium. It's called the sodium potassium pump. That's how the nerve system carries an action potential. So the whole idea of me doing this requires sodium and requires potassium. So do you need it when you're doing a fast? Yeah, I would say not a bad idea if you're doing it for 3 days. If you're doing it for 5 days, I definitely would consider doing that, and then making sure that when you're drinking your water, you're getting enough potassium, you're getting enough sodium, and you're also getting enough magnesium to make sure that these things are working the way that they are supposed to. So if you talk about an extended fast, like longer than doing intermittent fasting, I'm going to show you who should do it and who shouldn't. Okay. Who should do it and who shouldn't? Well, the first thing I'm going to talk about is men. Okay. Can men do it? Yes. There really are no restrictions to men doing any kind of fasting. And the reason why is because with men, their hormones, they're not getting a lot of contribution from their adrenal glands. So when it comes to a man and his hormones are made from the testicles, very little from the adrenal glands. And so it doesn't play a role if the fast is actually stressing them out. So can men do it? Yes, men can do it. In fact, I actually recommended today a gentleman on a consult, and I said, hey, it'd be a good idea for you to start fasting. I want you to fast, within the next week, and then follow up, doing it about every 3 months. So men, yes, they can do it every 3 months. I've done it once this year. Last year, I think I did it 9 or 10 times. And I just like playing around with it. And the reason why I do it is when I tell someone to do it, I shudder at the fact of someone coming to me and saying, well, have you done it? And me saying no. It's kind of like, the doctor saying you need to exercise and you need to watch your diet. And meanwhile, that the doctor is on the other side taking blood pressure medications and medications for type 2 diabetes. And that he, went to Arby's or Panera or Popeye's chicken for lunch. So I want to always be congruent with what I'm recommending. So men, yes, every 3 months. Now, the other thing is women. Okay. Now, women, basically, you have to divide this up. Postmenopausal women. The answer is yes, if, okay, there's an if they are very adrenally healthy. Okay. And, I've talked about adrenal fatigue, inflammation, things like that. But if a woman is post-menopause and she's coming and energy is one of the biggest issues, then I would not recommend that she actually fast. And the reason why is because she's going to have a hard time getting her cortisol levels up to be able to mobilize sugars when she is in this fasting mode. So if someone cannot actually bring their blood sugars up with enough cortisol, then the only thing a fast is going to do is keep them in bed for 3 days. And I've had that happen with women who, despite me saying don't do it, they've actually have said, they say, I'm going to do it anyway. And it's like, okay, tell me how it goes. And every time they say it was absolutely horrendous and awful. So, but postmenopausal women not having any kind of adrenal issues, low adrenal function, high inflammation, they can do it as well. Okay. The other thing is can some women who are cycling or who are of the age of cycling do it? Yes. And I would say if there's a woman, she has things like PCOS and insulin resistance, then yes, they can do a 3-day fast because it will do wonderful things when it comes to helping with their insulin resistance. And here's another one where I think clear across the board, whether it's cycling women, postmenopausal women, all men, in which they can do it, then that would be in the case of a person having a peptic ulcer. Okay. And the reason why is I want you to think of it. If you have an ulcer, it's like having a blister in your stomach, and the secretion of stomach acid is basically like putting acid on very raw, inflamed tissue, is why it hurts so much. So how do you actually get that to heal? Well, a great thing to do is to do a 3-day fast. There's some other things that you can take, like taking like aloe juice. There's some chamomile, things like that can lower down some of the stomach acid. But remember, the stomach lining turns over, can heal pretty quickly. And so if someone does have some kind of peptic ulcer, then the idea of fasting, even if they are cycling, because sometimes the first thing that we have to do is to get that healed first and foremost before we can even move on to doing any other things. So therefore, the menstrual cycle and things like that will take a back seat to getting this peptic ulcer actually healed. Okay. So who should do it? That's who should do it. Now, are there people who shouldn't do it? Okay. Yes. So cycling women. So if you are having a menstrual cycle and you want to mess it up, then go ahead and fast. I'm going to show you the reason why. Or people who shouldn't do it is if they have very low cortisol. Okay. Very low cortisol. And it's usually, guys, not because of adrenal fatigue. It's actually because they're very highly inflamed. For one reason, they might be dealing with infection. They might be dealing with a GI infection. They might be dealing with a viral infection. They're dealing with mold, for example, is a huge thing. And so when they are so inflamed and their cortisol levels are so low, when they try to fast and they need a cortisol spike in order to start to help with mobilizing sugars, they're not going to be able to do it. And they're going to be in this low blood sugar environment for a very, very long time, which means really the only thing that fasting is going to accomplish is that you weren't able to get out of bed for a long period of time. You're going to feel absolutely miserable. So those are the two things we say, hey, I wouldn't do it, especially. So why cycling women? Well, I'm going to show you why, because this is known as the steroid hormone pathway, the sex hormone pathway. And if you guys can understand this, you probably will know more about endocrinology than 90% of endocrinologists, okay? And if you understand how these hormones are created and how these hormones convert, then you will understand why so many people have so many hormone problems and why just inserting hormones from the outside in truly is not getting you well. So remember this, your hormones, your sex hormones are coming from cholesterol, LDL. So when someone says, doesn't matter, you can get your LDL down to 5, 10, 15, that will help you live longer. It may help you not have a heart attack or a stroke, but you'll die from someone else. This is what gets me, guys, is that when you have a specialist who's looking at one organ system without taking into consideration the whole entire body, this is why the heart doctor will look at the heart and say, yeah, your LDL can be at 5, 10, or 15. The lower, the better. But then they don't realize from a hormone perspective is that LDL actually contributes to making your hormones. And no, you need to get the LDL from the liver. Your cells do not make enough cholesterol by itself in order to manufacture hormones. You cannot create something from nothing. So you need the cholesterol. It's converted into pregnenolone. And then from pregnenolone, it can go down two pathways. It can go into progesterone or it can convert into cortisol. Cortisol is your stress hormone. Cortisol is your awake hormone. Cortisol is your blood sugar mobilization hormone. So if you think about this, if you are trying to and need a tremendous amount of cortisol because you are fasting, ladies, you can rob it from converting into progesterone. So now you're going to have a problem with a shortened menstrual cycle. That's why we don't recommend it for women who are cycling. Definitely don't recommend it if you're trying to get pregnant because of what it will do to your cycle. And so that's why, guys, why cortisol is a very important hormone. We all think that cortisol is really, really bad, but cortisol is just responding. High cortisol, people are like, I got to knock down my cortisol. My cortisol somehow going all weird. No, it's not. It's elevated for a reason, probably because there's something that's stressing either your brain or your body out. So that's why when we look at this, you got to pay attention to your hormones. And here's another example of someone who I would say, please don't fast. Please do not do it. If you look at this, this is called the Dutch test. And when you look at this individual, one of the things that you can see, and I apologize if my cursor is a little bit messed up. I don't know why that is. But if you look at this person, you can see estradiol, progesterone, testosterone. You can see, which all have an adrenal gland contribution. You can see how low all of those are. And then when you look at her ability to be able to make DHEA, which is produced by the adrenal glands, and then you also look at metabolized cortisol, which is essentially looking at the body's, the adrenal gland's ability to make stress hormone, you can see how low that is too. So if you look at all of this and you look at the hormones that are getting made by the adrenal gland, how low they are, wow. One of the biggest things that you would say is this person, there is something happening in their adrenal glands. Okay. Now the next question is you try to figure out why are the adrenal glands responding this way? Well, in this case, in this person's case, This person had a terrible issue when it comes to mold toxicity. And this was a unique individual because for a lot of times when you have like not environmental mold, but we're talking about water damage mold, for 76% of the people, you get them out of the environment and they recover. They can actually have an antibody response to the mold toxin. For 24% of people, they can't, which means that they're always having a massive inflammatory response, and this never, ever ends. So they'll have massive inflammation, it goes away, it comes back, it goes away, it comes back. And basically because they can't have an antibody response, they cannot tag the mold toxin with an antibody and allow the adaptive immune system to be sniper specific in order to be able to get rid of it, which means they have to rely on their innate immune system, which is associated with much less specific high inflammatory response. And that's why this person was having so many inflammatory issues around the barriers, around the gastrointestinal system, around the kidneys, in the brain. And you can see the hormone response. And this is why, guys, hormones, they don't make you sick. They'll make you feel sick. But the reason why you're sick is not because of your hormones. It's actually because of either mental stress or your immune system. So in this case, this person fasting, absolutely not. Okay. No way about it. So hopefully you guys, you understand by looking at this is fasting for me. And intermittent fasting, I believe that everybody can do that, doing some time restricted eating. But if you go into a extended fast 3 or 5 days, then for some people, you do have to be a little bit careful. Men, you don't have to be careful, but cycling women, yes, we don't recommend it unless you have, some kind of peptic ulcer, or if you have PCOS, in which something like that could benefit you occasionally doing that. But you look at postmenopausal women, typically, yes, unless your cortisol is absolutely in the tank. And then at that point, doing a fast is not going to benefit you, especially. So guys, I hope you found this interesting. We're going to go over part 2 next week. And in part 2, we're going to talk about what happens when you do a 3-day fast, some of the symptoms that you have with the 3-day fast, what that actually means, and then the result of doing extended fasts. And I'm also going to go over with you too, from looking at this, as you can see, I'm giving you a little bit of preview, but also a lot of times people say, well, I fast because I feel so much better. I don't feel bloated. I don't feel swollen. I don't feel inflamed. And so I'll tell you, you can actually still be able to eat and to feel that way so that you don't have to constantly find yourself fasting all the time. So I'm going to show you the secret to actually being able to eat, because remember, fasting makes you feel better. At some point, you're going to need to eat. And so you're going to have to introduce food. But if it's causing all of these immune issues again, then we need to actually start digging deeper. And I'm going to show you how you dig deeper. So I'll show you on the next part, what happens during a fast, how you feel, why you might feel really, really jacked up at night. And I'll show you why that happens. But then I'll also show you, hey, technically you could get the benefits of fasting, but still eating. And I'll show you exactly the secret on how you do that next week. So next Monday. So guys, again, if you are from the Chicagoland area, our next inflammation talk is going to be coming up tomorrow, Tuesday, March 14th at 6 o'clock p.m. right here at Exemplify Health Center. If you're from the Chicagoland area, you want to work with Exemplify Health Center, myself, Dr. Brian, exclusively, just go up to the top of the page. You're on Facebook, and then follow the link, the Eventbrite link, to get registered for it. Also, if you're on Instagram, follow the link on their profile, and you'll see the link when you click on that to be able to get registered for the inflammation talk coming up. So guys, next week, I'm going to go over part 2. I'll recap a little bit of part 1, and then I'll go into some really, really awesome stuff. We just needed to give you kind of a baseline, how we felt about fasting, who should, who shouldn't do it. But I'm going to go in a little bit more detail about what happens to the body when you do it, but then also how to feel like you're having the immune benefits of fasting without having to fast all the time. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this. Please share this video if you found this enjoyable. Be well, be blessed. Guys, I hope you remember who you are. And we'll talk to you guys very soon.